coffee. How many of you have been here to our space? Okay. How many of you, this is your first time here? Everybody. Welcome. So we are more than just space. We're fortunate enough to have this space to operate our programming out of. We have this wonderful room. We can get about 200 folks in here. And then we have lots of other meeting spaces. We have co-work space as well as office suite space. In addition, we are your smart zone for Macomb County. How many of you are aware that you have a smart zone in Macomb County? Yeah, okay, a few of you. So for those of you who don't know, smart zones were originally created to get tech transfer out of universities. And it continued to evolve. And so where we are today, we are completely agnostic. Any entrepreneur who lives or works in Macomb County can come to us for help with their business. Our incubator program allows you to come to us with an idea on a napkin. We will help you vet that idea, help you create a strategic business plan and a go-to-market plan, and get you up and running. We have our entrepreneur in residence, which I happen to have one of them here. He's our lead entrepreneur in residence, Rick Panay. Wave to everybody. Rick does all of our coaching and I guess I would say business discovery, business planning. So if you are in the tech, aerospace, DoD, manufacturing space, that is the coach that you would work with. We also have Dusty. She's not here today, but she works with all other businesses. We also have our accelerator program that takes businesses that are typically at about $500,000 in gross revenue. And we help those businesses grow. So sometimes those businesses are looking to acquire another ancillary business, they're looking to create some succession planning, they're looking to package their business for sale, or maybe they're looking for funding. In addition to all of those things, I would encourage you to check out our website. Every month we have lots of different things going on. This year our focus is authors for coffee and conversation. Oli was one of our presenters this year. It was really a wonderful session. So month over month, we have different local authors in, and when you come, you get a copy of their book, which is very exciting, and they're also gracious enough to sign their books. We also have partnered with Michigan Founders Fund, so we host the Founders First Fridays, and that's a networking group, and it is designed to help founders connect with other founders and kind of commiserate on what that solopreneur journey looks like. And it's really a fun time to get these folks together, gives them lots of ideas and ways to network with people who are going through the same things that they are as they're starting a business. How many of you are business owners? So a fair amount of you. How many of you endeavor to start a business or you have an idea? You all should be talking to me. We have grant dollars, we have education, coaching and support, and then we also have space to help you start your business. So make sure that you reach out, and if it's not for you, maybe somebody else you know. So please do connect folks with us. So with that, I will turn it over to Doug Odie Slogan.
Yep. Okay, I don't like being too quiet, so if in doubt, too loud, right? So he put constraints up here on me. There's pieces of tape on the floor that I'm not supposed to go past. So if you know me, first thing I'm going to do to Brian is
right out of the school.
I went past my tape. Anyway, welcome. Glad everybody's here. We normally start off, Janina is not with us to do the wonderful singing, so we're going to randomly pick somebody to come sing a cappella. No? Tony, not you? All right. How about we do the Pledge of Allegiance? Would you join me, please? We've got a flag over here to your left. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Have a seat, please. Thank you. By the way, we have lots to drink. We have lots of tacos and everything, so if you are so inspired and still need a little bit more tacoing, please help yourself back there. It looks like we're going to have some leftovers. So, and my family only has so much taco tolerance. But speaking of food, next month is our, I'd almost call it our famous, it's our annual picnic out at the Enlisted Heritage House at Selfridge. So next month we're going to be doing that, getting everybody together. I think last year we had about 130 people there. wonderful time, great food, great cook. I'm going to see if the guy who's our wonderful smoker, the famous guy that runs the pork and everything out there, is going to be available. But we'll have that going, the grill going, burgers, brats, pork, and everything else on the beautiful lakefront. Let's pray that we keep getting the good weather that we've had for these events in the past. But so, in September, we have our annual convention for the Air Force Association. That's like the internal business. All the state people, chapters all come together. That's where we vote on stuff, go through all the important stuff. One of the things they do every year, though, is they come up with their superlatives, the award winners. I've actually been notified already. I will make the announcement today. But the State Organization of the Year and I really had to think about this for a minute. The amazing part is, so the National Guard, this is a reserve component state. We have no active duty base in this state. And NAUGUS, the National Guard Association, is the advocacy group for the National Guard. We're the total force, we cover both. But it's really amazing if you think about it. The Air Force Advocacy Group is in a state, there's award winner, in a state without any active duty. So, I mean, that's great kudos to the team and everything else. They realize we are having an impact. We are doing that education, advocacy, and support roles that we have, those verbs that we're supposed to do very well. So you'll see some social media posts and everything on this coming out here pretty soon. But congratulations to you all. We are making a difference, and we're setting the bar. If you think about, Florida, Texas, Virginia, those bases that, that have huge Air Force bases and hundreds of people in the chapters, yet we're the best. So, I love it. So, into our topic for today. I think we've covered Paula and everything else. Real quick, everybody on my team, officially on our team, would you just please stand up? Everybody on the executive committee of the AFA, thank you all so much. And we're publicly pressuring Tony to join this team here, so help us twist his arm. We're going to make him, he's a social butterfly, so we're going to use that talent.
I only spent 30 years in the military.
But, and normally I go elected officials and offices, but Lisa, I think you all are the only ones in the room. Well, no, we have a county, yep, Don and Tom. Okay, fantastic. So thank you, you're always with us, and we appreciate that a ton. Lisa, do you want to introduce that new guy in your office? I'll use a little laser pointer, but I don't know.
Yes, Lisa Brown from Action, John James' office. This is James Michael, who's the newest addition to our office. He's our veteran and military outreach liaison. So everything veterans.
Veterans issues and all, but glad you're here. So if you know any...
If you want to throw his card at him, we'll email you back.
Okay. And it wasn't confusing at all when James from John James' office was showing up to the event. I got a little confused. I said, by the way, John James is showing up. No, wait, James is showing up. Close enough. Not confusing at all. Based on the inputs, I wanted basically to address the big picture of the U.S. Air Force, because I don't think we've ever really done that. Is to kind of take a step back. Let's look at our U.S. Air Force, our capabilities, our challenges. So I kind of wanted to go through this today, but I also want to do it informally, which means throw your hands up, let's ask questions, let's chase whatever rabbits you want. But I'm going to throw a lot of information at you in the next little bit here as we go. All right, just from a personnel standpoint, this is across history since the Air Force started, well actually well before the Air Force started, the number of people serving in what now we would call our active duty Air Force. But if you look at the numbers, you can see that they've continually dwindled off. We have fewer airplanes, we have fewer people, there's more automation, fewer facilities through time. So when we talk about the Air Force being the smallest that it has ever been in its history, one of the measures is the number of people in it. And you'll see the other measures here in just a little bit. But you can see the spikes in the different wars when we have people enlisted, but essentially there are fewer people in the Air Force than ever before in history. Now, spending. This is as a percentage of our gross domestic product. All right, so this isn't the dollar amounts. This is how much our country has put towards their defense as a percentage of the economy. And you can see that there was one dip there in the around 2000, but we're hanging right around that 3% mark. If you look at NATO, NATO's goal is to get everybody to raise their defense spending to 2%. And yet we have declined down to 3%. So just so you understand, What our treasurer, our time, talents, and treasurers we put into national security in this country really does raise the bar, but from a percentage standpoint, you know, we continue to decline. Now, when we look at that in the big picture though, that 3% has been constant, but the government spending isn't. This is not a political statement, this is fact. This is what we're looking at in the budget. When we started all that COVID spending, we've never gone back to normal. So that 3% now gets dwarfed by the other spending of the U.S. government, to include the discretionary spending. You will hear a number of senior leaders in the Air Force talk about the long-term threat that the national debt is to our national security. So we have to understand this relationship. Even though we're talking percentages of the GDP, look how much we're spending right now. The more we spend, the more we have to spend on interest, and the less is available discretionarily to be able to support growth and programs in the future. There's a whole other thing. You can sign up if you're a member of the AFA to get the notifications. You'll hear General Deptula all the time talking about what he calls pass-through budgeting, which is money that is allocated to the Air Force that doesn't go to the Air Force. And there is a large chunk of money that does just that goes to other things. So when the Congress a lot of times talks about, you know, Army gets this, Navy gets this, Air Force gets this, they've been screaming, stomping their feet going, but, take tens of billions away from that in reality. They wanted to try and get that accounting into a separate thing, and that's one of the things the Air Force Association has been advocating for, is pass-through spending needs to be its own category. Quit hanging that on the U.S. Air Force, because it draws a really warped picture of overall spending. So when we look at the force now, I just want to make sure we understand some of the words that we use. In the Air Force, we've been used to this thing on this left. We would call this a permissive environment. This is where we don't have a lot of high-tech threats. This is where we've been able to operate in Afghanistan, in Iraq. These types of environments where we can take these slow airplanes and fly over threat areas and not have to worry about it. But now we've refocused back to what we would call a near-peer threat. So now we're talking China, Russia, even the capabilities of North Korea, Iran, and some countries like that. And even what we've been seeing with the Houthis to a degree. It is at least contested. That means that we're going to have to guard these airplanes. There's things that are going to be able to shoot us down. We can't go in undefended. We have to approach business differently. But forward thinking, we have to go into now what would be considered highly contested, where we have an adversary that has similar capabilities to what we have to be able to operate in that environment. And numerically, we're going to get swamped. There's no way we're going to keep up with numbers, especially when you want to focus on China. That is why we talk about now these high performance, these stealth, not really the accurate term, low observable type of aircraft, the F-35, the B-2, the B-21. These things, when we talk about this next generation of capability, why it's so important. We're used to thinking on the left. We have to start thinking on the right. And I'll use a perfect example as a guy who used to fly A-10s. The A-10's slow, radar cross-section of a barn door. Everybody loves it, but which environment is that going to be good in? Only on the far left. When you have very capable systems on the ground, in the air, other types of threats, it's not going to be survivable in those environments. So we have to take a good look at what we're talking about. Do we upgrade F-16s and F-15s? They might work in the contested, but once again, in this new, what we're looking at in the future, not necessarily going to be the case. What we're not going to talk about today, the intangibles. There is a lot of things that add to capabilities. I wanted to do these as bills. Sorry, they all came up at once. Experience. The U.S. Air Force is very experienced. We've had a lot of conflict. We've had a lot of wars. We've learned a lot. We've put that into how we train, how we do our business. And I'll draw the contrast to when was the last time China was in a war? Anybody?
Vietnam.
It was Vietnam. They actually invaded Vietnam, and they got their butt kicked by that little country in 1970 something. I'm trying to remember exactly. But that's their last combat experience. Everything else is theoretical. They've read books. They look what everybody else is doing. They don't have that experience. You have to be able to throw that into the equation when we're trying to compare the capabilities of the U.S. Air Force to others. Our doctrine, a perfect example. Our doctrine is, for example, air superiority. If we were to go into a conflict, the first thing we want to do is control the air. We want to dominate the air above the battlefield. What's happened in Ukraine? Russia did not have that same doctrine. They don't organize their Air Force, they don't employ their Air Force in that way, and that airspace over Ukraine has been contested the entire time. Nobody has controlled the air. So my point is, we wouldn't even approach that problem the same way that our adversaries do. We have a different way of doing things, once again, because of our experiences through the years. And those doctrinal differences can make a huge impact on how you design your Air Force, how you design your planes, how you employ them, how you train, and everything going forward. Culture, do you have a warrior culture? I used to do international training, and I can tell you there's a huge difference between the different countries around the world and the warrior ethos. And it's one of those, it's an intangible, but when you meet, the fighting spirit, the warriors that we have in the U.S. Air Force, I'm here to tell you, that is going to be tough to beat by any country around the world, because just their whole approach of being aggressive, being innovative, is different. In Russia and China, they're into the hierarchy. You're not going to have people voicing dissent. You're not going to have people with new ideas. They're not going to have the innovation to be able to come up and solve the tactical problems that we have been doing for a long time. Of course, leadership matters. How do you grow leaders? As we can see, once again, back to that Russia-Ukraine example, the leadership or the lack thereof on the Russian side has cost them dearly. When you looked at things on paper, Russia should have been sitting in Kiev within 3 days. Right. But that's not how it worked out at all. When they went across the border, they had a smaller force, less equipped, less capable, that basically held them at bay and has now for, 18, 19 months that this has been going on. So leadership matters. What's the industrial base? How long does it take to produce, to flex to new things, to produce more artillery shells? You've seen that example going on, that we've been consuming, the world has been consuming them at a rate way faster than we can produce them. How fast can industry answer those calls? How fast can industry support? One perfect example right now, you look at us on the naval side, all right? China's building ships faster than us. Numerically, our Navy is no longer the largest in the world. Tonnage-wise, we still are. But China has the ability to build ships at, no kidding, 20 to 1. They can build ships 20 times the capacity that we have. We have a national crisis of even keeping our ships operational right now because of the shipyards. We don't have the infrastructure in place. It's a huge problem, all right? But we have to be able to look at industry. Geography, China, they're not a world power by where they sit geographically. They're chained in by the island chains. They can't even get out to the open ocean without going past other countries. But at the same time, they're a single country. Where do they deploy around the world? Nowhere. So when we talk about the Chinese Air Force, it's all of them versus whatever side we deploy around the world to be able to face off against them. So there's pros and cons of geography, but that has to be taken into the equation when you look at the strength of a country. And then deployment. We are the only military in the world that can pick up and go anywhere in the world and fight. We keep transport planes, we keep capabilities, we put massive investment in the ability to go anywhere in the world. Nobody else does that. Tankers, airlift, etc. It drives a big part of our budget. Then alliances, who are our friends? I spent a large portion of my career in the international F-16 training business. That's working with our coalition partners, being able to have that interoperability. Most of the time, if we go to war, we don't want to go by ourselves. We want to have our partners with us. And that could play into it. And in China right now, our Pacific partners are a big part of that balance of power. And then the last is, we're going to talk about the M and dime a lot today, which is just military. But keep in mind that when you look at power being projected by a country, however you want to do it, that's diplomacy, information, military, and economics. They all go together hand in hand. China uses all four of those very well. The United States keeps ours very apart. And we look at one at a time, and they don't necessarily work hand in hand. So how comprehensive are we in how we try and project power or influence around the world is very different than the way other countries do. That's a lot of talk on something I'm not going to talk about, huh? Yes, sir.
Odie, looking at geography vis-a-vis China, South China Sea, do we have an answer for what they build out in the South China Sea? And do we know of other initiatives they're undertaking to replicate that elsewhere?
Okay, so Real quick, China has gone to these shoals and everything in the South China Sea, and they have built them into islands. The United Nations said they're not yours. China says, too bad, we're not going to follow, what has been ruled in the international courts. They built islands, they built bases, and they basically are saying, here's what we're claiming. It doesn't go with international law. It does not go with United Nations declarations and everything else. China, as you can read in the paper every day, is bullying more and more along those fronts. They're about to probably start a shooting war here soon in the Philippines as a result of all that. What have we done? We haven't physically stopped them. We do FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations. We drive our ships in areas that they claim that we say they don't. They get all mad, they fluffle their feathers. Right now it's a diplomatic war, but it's also very quick, a tinderbox of what could turn hot quick. Sorry, that's a quick answer to it, but yeah, there's a lot that we could be doing that we're not, and this is where diplomacy and the other things come in, that we haven't necessarily been employing. There we go. All right, you heard me talk about wanting to always control the air, and I've said this before in our meetings for those of you who haven't. The last time a U.S. troop of any kind wearing a uniform was killed by enemy air attack was late in 1953, and if you ever watched that episode of MASH, they called it 5 O'Clock Charlie. It was called Bed Check Charlie in reality. These old Polish biplanes at the end of the war that are so slow and so old that our air defenses couldn't even find them, and they would fly at night and literally throw little bombs out the side of the prop airplane. And it was one of our troops on can't remember the name of the little island off the coast of North Korea, now we call North Korea, was killed. That was the last time. Not a single U.S. troop has been killed by an enemy air attack since 1953, until this year. Okay? In January of this year, a drone attack in Jordan killed 3 of our soldiers at a little obtuse area known as Tower 22, up near the border with Iraq on the Jordanian side. But, just for the math, to me there was a big deal, and it should be a big deal. 71 years, okay, it's 70 years and 9 months of dominance is no longer. We have now had a chink in our armor, if you will. And for those of you who are geeky in math, that's how many days. We controlled the air on everything around the world and everything that we did. But my point is, whatever we do in the future is going to be more contested. This was a drone attack by a militia. Imagine if we're with China, if we're fighting against Russia, if we're going against Iran and some of the capabilities that are out there with more capable forces. The presumption of dominance cannot be how we look at things going forward in the military. All right, airplanes themselves, how many have we had through the years? This is just a physical count of the number of planes. As you can see, when we talk about being the smallest that we've ever been, we've been pretty steady for about 10 years now on the numbers of airplanes, but here's one that should get your attention. When we talk about fighter jets, for example, this is the number of fighter jets we bought every year. And then, if you look at that green line, it's now the average age of the planes, our fighter jets in particular, in this slide. We bought hundreds of them right up until the 1990s, and we quit buying airplanes. We bought the F-22s, we'll talk about them. We started buying F-35s now. But we wonder why our Air Force is old airplanes, older capabilities and everything. It's because we quit buying airplanes for decades. All right, and we've never really corrected that. We'll end up 70 some if we ever get up to full rate production a year of the F-35s for the U.S. Air Force, which we're not into that yet. But this is part of the problem that we're looking at. When we talk about what fighter jet is going to go to Selfridge, we ain't got them. We simply don't. And the ones that are out there are old. They're tired. They're tough to keep in the air. So let's take a quick look here, and I want to explain. We're going to go through the different weapon systems of the Air Force. Starting off with our big old bombers. These are the capabilities to fly all the way around the world. The B-1. Okay, I'm going to go down the numbers. On the left is the number that we have. It's going to be in the top. And this is going to be the same on every one of these charts. When it first flew in 1974, when it entered service, and I'll explain why the difference there in this particular case, how old the average plane is out there, the average age, and then this is called the mission capable rate. On any given day, what percentage are ready to go fly? Less than half, okay? That's why I have it in yellow. So we only have 45 of these, which tells me 22 are ready on any given day, all around the world, for training, for missions and everything else, that's the number of B-1 bombers. Originally built as a supersonic plane, Carter administration, it was canceled. Then they decided to revive it, and it became the B-1B, different type of a capability, and we ended up buying 100 and some of them, but we have 45 of these left, all right? And they are projected to go out of service within a decade. But keeping them in the air, complex airplane, very difficult. Now we go to the B-2. So we spent billions of dollars to build a stealth bomber, and we built 21 of them. We're supposed to build over 100. We built 21, we've wrecked one, all right? Crashed in Guam on takeoff. But look at the number of years from the time it first flew till the time it was operational, all right? Almost a decade that we had to test it and all before it even became a fieldable weapon. But even the stealth bomber is 28 years old on average. 28 years old. Think if you had a 28-year-old car sitting out there and what the technology would be. So even though it has this low observable, and we think of it as the state of the art, 1989. I call my car that's a 1989 a vintage Mustang. Okay? But a mission capable rate is just a little bit better. All these are white in Missouri, one base. B-52s. Can you believe those things are still flying? And those other two bombers are going to be retired long before we retire these. All right, the B-52, 1952, in service pretty quick, 62 years old. And I'm going to show you in a minute. We're going to refurbish these and keep them flying even longer. But once again, hanging right around that 50% capable rate. 76 bombers, so half of that number available at any given time. They're going to re-engine these things. They're going to call it the B-52J. Rolls-Royce engines, new avionics, and they're going to keep them around. Not only are the last people to fly these airplanes been born yet, not only have the parents of the last people to fly these airplanes not been born yet, keep going. They're going to be over 100 years old and still flying in our U.S. Air Force. All right? The B-52, like I said, the B-2s and the B-1s are going to be retired, and the one that predated all that is still going to be flying in the U.S. Air Force for decades to come. And then if you all, our virtual event talked about the new bomber that is now flying, that's being designed at the moment. There's one currently flying. We're planning on buying 100. If you listened on our virtual brief, we made the case on why we need almost 300 of these to fulfill the requirements that we have around the world. First flight this year, not in service yet, and it's pretty new. A little bit smaller than the B-2, but much more, I mean, you're decades and decades newer technologies that are available. All right, into the fighters, we got to start off with the A-10 first, right? You heard about the A-10 Warthog. These aren't going out of service, all right? It's got that big Galley cannon, built the airplane around it and everything else. Pretty good mission capable rate for a fighter. You can see that it started in service in 1977. They built a lot of them. They've updated them, but they never built any more after that initial production. 43 years old with a few improvements. So an older airplane, it is not survivable in a modern age, and about 4 or 5 years from now, these will all be retired out of the inventory, including, I believe last I saw, Selfridge is actually going to be the last, or one of the last bases flying the A-10 Warthog. F-15s, well, probably have heard about these, air superiority planes, first designed in the late 70s, in service 1975, pretty old. But I do want to point out something right here. 41% mission capable rate, because they have these things called longerons, which is part of the structure right behind the cockpit, that there's been a problem with that they haven't figured out how to fix. Most of them are grounded. They're never going to fly again. That's why, even though the numbers that we have, they're very quickly dissipating out of the force, and within a couple years there will be what we call Blue Eagles, air superiority F-15s, will be gone out of the inventory. We do have the Strike Eagle, which they took that same platform and decided to make it into a multi-purpose strike aircraft. We only built a couple hundred of them. Newer airframe, they have been flying the tar out of these things. It's a workhorse of the Air Force, but they are 32 years old. And they've got about a 55% mission capable rate. But this is one of the most used aircraft. The Air Force is trying to retire some of the older models of this. Congress told them no. Just so you know, that's part of the battle. I think there were 30 or 40 of them that the Air Force wanted to park to make this fleet smaller. And the Air Force is saying no. And Commander of ACC is also agreeing at this point not to retire them. And then the new one, what do they decide to do? Let's build a new Eagle. So there's actually F-15s rolling off the production line now with a lot of the problems fixed, with a lot of new avionics and capabilities that are out there right now. But a whole program for 96 to 100 and some odd airplanes. It keeps fluctuating a little bit on the number being bought. There was talks about trying to put these at Selfridge. They're going to put 36 of these over at Kadena in Okinawa, near China. It is the first operational ones showed up in Oregon just within the last few months. So this is just entering into service, but once again, a very small program in the big scheme of things, but being bought by countries around the world. A number of them are buying these new models of the F-15 that are out there. All, by the way, other than Kadena, all the bases flying these in the U.S. are going to be Air National Guard. The workhorse of the Air Force, my love, the F-16. Lots of different models of this plane that are out there, but in the U.S. Air Force, almost 900 of these, but they're 33 years old. Relatively simple, single engine, very capable, multi-role, not a low observable platform at all, but a very capable multi-role type of an airplane. The F-22, once again, we spent billions of dollars to build. It was fewer than 200 of these things. We've had a few of them crash, of course, through the years. This is an amazing airplane for air dominance. Once again, they've had some problems with the structure, but the reality is when you have fewer than 200 of them in service, keeping them going in the long run is not very economical. So we spent a hell of a lot of money. We were supposed to build almost 1,000 of these. But with the end of the Cold War, we decided, hey, we don't really need to dominate the air so much, and they just cut the program back to where now they're actually talking about retiring this fleet of airplanes. Very actively, there's some older ones, the Block 20s. There's 32 of them that the Air Force keeps saying they want to park because they can't keep them to the same standard as the others, and they keep being told, no, you can't. You must keep them in service. So if you hear about the F-22, an amazing platform. It goes higher, faster, farther than any other plane we have. You know, kinematically, what it can do is spectacular. With the vectoring thrust, it is our current air dominance fighter that we have. But with a mission capable rate of 52%, and you only have 185 of them, that gets pretty thin peanut butter around the world pretty quick. How many platforms do we have to, go over Syria, to go over, Ukraine, to fight China, to go North Korea? You run out of planes very, very quickly. We just simply don't have very many of these. This is the new one coming off the production line now, the F-35, multi-role, multinational platform. Actually, for the last year, they have not delivered a single one. They've been parking them because they haven't been able to deliver because of Technical Refresh 3, TR3. New computers, but the software didn't work. So literally, more than 100 of these things, brand new off the production line, are parked. And just today, I saw that they're finally going to start delivering these back now, as they say, about one a day, one a week, or something like that. But keep in mind, this is international all the way across our services, so the Marine Corps, Navy, us, and all the countries around the world fly these things. Mission capable rate, it's a new airplane. They've been struggling with it. The automated logistics system that was supposed to work so great hasn't been so great, and we're looking at a greater or less than 50% availability of the planes that we do have that are in service. That number 408 is the current of the U.S. Air Force, by the way. Like I said, the Navy and Marines have a bunch also, and then they're also around the world. NGAD, Next Generation Air Defense is what it's called. Rumors are that it was flying. It was a black program out there. It was going to be the next generation. We were talking about buying around 200 of them. They were going to have, I think I have a separate slide on the cooperative combat aircraft. So you're going to have a plane with a person in it that's going to have a lot of little airplanes flying around it that it's connected to that are like its wingmen, automated, if you will. This was supposed to replace the F-22 in the long run. Just in the last few weeks, a lot of talk on canceling this program. Apparently the Air Force has figured out they can't afford it. So if you look in the news right now, what's supposed to replace the little fleet of F-22s that we have is apparently on the chopping block. So how are we going to dominate the air is a great question, which leads me to, our military always has stuff that's never out in public, by the way. Remember, we had the F-117 that was out there for a long time before it was ever acknowledged. Okay, there's a lot of capabilities that we have that aren't necessarily things you're going to read about in magazines. But we're not going down that path right now. This is a publicly acknowledged. This program is likely on the chopping block. And there we go. The CCA, Cooperative Combat or Collaborative Combat Aircraft, little drones. So think about it. You could be one airplane, but you could have parts of you that are here, there, other sensors, shooters over here, etc. Interesting thought of capability, how that could all work. They've actually started flying the first couple prototypes of this. Okay, if you own the skies, you can take this big lumbering plane around and put all sorts of guns on it and sensors, anywhere from howitzers to Gatling guns to rails that they can put out on the end now, and you fly it. This goes back to spooky, what they call it, Vietnam. The little C-47s with the Gatling guns on the side.
Spooky, Puff, and Casper.
Casper, yeah, all those. But basically, this iteration has been going on and on until the newest generation. Very, very capable, wonderful sensors. You know, you can take that howitzer there in the back and literally go, third window over here, you got it, yeah, okay. But you have to own the skies because you're going to be lumbering around in a left-hand turn. All the guns go out the left. In a left-hand turn to be able to be a threat to those folks on the ground. So great if you happen to have complete air dominance. Mainly built for the Marines, but we do have a handful of these for special operations, primarily rescue and special ops. The Osprey, this is the thing that can be an airplane and a helicopter. All right, so it can tilt all the way up, land like a helicopter, take off, go forward, fly like an airplane. Great capability, pretty expensive platform, but the Air Force operates what we have 52 of those. In service with the AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command. And mechanically kind of tough, once again, put in yellow, less than 50% capable on any given day. All right, we have a lot of airplanes we modify through the years. So same C-130, this rugged prop plane that can go off in small strips, they have psychological warfare versions. All 5 of these are in a place in Pennsylvania with a guard unit. But they do psychological warfare. It's like radio stations, TV stations, Voice of America-ish type of things where they can go out and broadcast around the world. That's what they do, psychological operations, information warfare. Then we go to the MC-130J. This is special operations C-130s that can be flown around the world. Remember in Iran when we had the problem, we tried to go rescue the hostages in the C-130s in the desert that caught fire and blew up and all, or earlier versions of this. These are special operations. They can fly low level at night in the mountains. They can take folks, put them in. They can be used as normal transports also. So a very flexible platform that's very useful. But we have 50-some of these, almost all of our special operations. Then we have some little planes. This one basically an ISR type of a platform. ISR is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. It's a snoop plane. It can look, it can sniff electronics and all that type of stuff and help us figure out where the bad guys are. We used to have over 30 AWACS. I think most everybody's probably heard that term before. This plane's been around since the 1970s. Big radar in the sky. We've retired about half of them. We've upgraded the others. We only have 15 of these. They're all based at Tinker in Oklahoma. But the big eye in the sky that we're used to, they've never upgraded the engines on it. It's still the old style and everything. But we still have a handful of these that are available around the world. This is not Air Force One. We have the E-4, which is the advanced command post that flies out of Offutt in Nebraska. This is the big plane that you put the national decision makers on during a time of crisis that can fly around. Basically, it can help with our launch strategic platforms. Am I being nebulous enough there? On the things that it can do. But basically, a large command and control type of an aircraft. 4. E-11. Yeah, this is amazing. I love it. Battlefield Airborne Communications Node, BACN. They actually call it the Bacon. And they say it's an amazing capability. It's a flying Wi-Fi in the sky. So basically, when this thing's flying, people can plug in. It can help our networks. It can help our data links and everything else. It's a communications platform. And more of them are rolling off the production line now on Gulfstream, basically. These used to be right next to where I sat Homeland Defense Alert at Davis Monthan. The arrays of antennas on the back are pretty amazing, but these are jamming type of platforms. They go after electronics, they go after data links, these types of things. Very capable, but this is one of the oldest model C-130s still flying. They're going out of service, more than 50 years old. They have a hard time keeping them in the air. They are being replaced by this thing. There's one of them flying, it's a prototype. Now all those electronics are in those big side swelly things on this type of airplane. We're going to build 10 of those to replace the ones I just showed you prior to that. And once again, EM on the tail, Davis Mountain, that's where they're planning on putting it. But a plane that will be operational in the future. A lot of these old 707 type platforms have been modified through the years, most all of them out of Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. But they've been modified to do all sorts of different reconnaissance out there. You can see the funky antennas on there. They do a lot of the strategic work. They'll fly around the world. They'll snoop on Russia, China, these types of things. It's how we figure out what they're doing, what type of electronics they have and the like. There's different versions. We used to always work with RJ. This is a rivet joint. This would actually be really good at electronics. When they turn on their missile radars and stuff, this is what could tell us. It puts it on the network and we're able to tell where all the bad guy stuff is. It's airplanes like this, but once again, 61-year-old average, those airplanes. The electronics have been updated, but the airplanes themselves are really old. Gary Powers got shot down in a U-2. All right, so there is a version of that we still fly to this day, a version of the U-2, the U-2S, we went back, it was the TR-1, but now the U-2S, these are almost all out of Beale in California, Northern California. Older airplane, but once again, very capable. This thing can fly at, let's say, greater than 80,000 feet. It goes up real high, can fly a long time, can go all around the world, and has fantastic sensors. But once again, being phased out in favor of new capabilities. We have 10 of these, 10 of these with a reserve unit down at Keesler. Their job, these are the hurricane hunters. All right? When we have the bad storms, these are the guys that go fly through the storm, send the data back. And also 10 airplanes that we keep around to be able to do this type of stuff for the country. Constant Phoenix, all sorts of air sampling and collection is a nice way of saying it sniffs out nukes. All right, so if there's been a nuke test or something like that, this is the airplane that flies over and goes, yep, nukes were here, and gives us the information. So that's what it means by air sampling. It's not really checking air quality or anything like that. But for an older airplane, 61 years old, 87% ready to go. But once again, we have this handful. And believe it or not, there's a lot more versions of these. I'm just giving you some of the primary ones. There's probably a dozen different varieties of that airplane out there. Then we have the refueling type, once again, primarily used by rescue or special operations. We have C-130s that can refuel helicopters, other types of airplanes in our Air Force. Relatively new, so these are the J models with the new propellers and everything else. But 39 of those. We did a virtual brief on the KC-46. This is the next generation tanker. So this is air mobility. This is getting us around the world. We don't do anything in our U.S. Air Force without tankers. It's how we get around the world. It's how we fly long missions in airplanes that don't hold a lot of gas. As I used to say, when my A-10s deployed to the Middle East, they would take off with not a lot of gas because it was hot and you had to take off light. Then they would hit a tanker. They'd go up over the bad guy land. They'd fill up off of the tanker. They'd fight the bad guys and fill up on the tanker. They'd fight the bad guys, hit the tanker, come home, hit the tanker, and land. So it wouldn't be uncommon to air refuel 4, 5, 6 times on a single mission. When we did Homeland Defense Alert, it was always the tankers that we would have to, if we're going to do a 4-hour combat air patrol, it meant you had to take gas a couple times. So our tankers are immensely important for the Air Force to be able to do what we do. And this is what's rolling off the production line now. This is what's coming to Selfridge, 12 of these. Sir?
Yeah, how many airplanes can actually fuel off of that?
This one actually has wingtip pods at the same time. I'm not sure if you can use the boom and the 2 wingtip pods simultaneously. Theoretically, I'd say 3, because you could have 1 boom and 2 probe and drogue. You want to know how stupid our military is, by the way? To this day, the U.S. Air Force is the only one that uses that big thing like that. It transfers fuel a lot quicker and everything. I don't have a picture of a probe and drogue, but it's a little parachute thing that comes out. The other airplanes have a probe that then you walk up and you stick into that basket.
For a helicopter.
So that's how the Navy refuels. That's how most of the Air Forces around the world refuel. Only the U.S. Air Force does it this way. They're not compatible, they use them completely different, but we've had to modify our tankers so they can always do both.
I think
All right.
you meant how many different, how many times can they refuel? Like, can one tanker refuel how many jets?
That's what I was saying when I started. There's wingtip
Well,
pods,
not at the same time, but total.
depends on how much gas they give them.
Well, that's just it, but.
Well, the answer is it's gonna be, it depends.
Okay.
All right, if you go up with a bomber, you can give all your gas off to one bomber. All right, if you're airplanes where you get 2,000 pounds of gas, you can refuel 40 or 50 of them.
They use the other ones for the helicopters too.
Yeah, helicopters and all. But yeah, incompatible between the different services, which is kind of insane. But there's wingtip pods to do the Navy style, and then there's the big boom in the back to do Air Force style refueling. The KC-135, the workhorse of our tanker fleet right now, look at how many of those. We had over 600 of those at one point in our Air Force. It can have a boom on the back, like we use in the Air Force, or they can put a little probe thing on it, modify it, but they can't unmodify it. So it can be one or the other, and it can only have the one for the Navy planes to be able to refuel. So it has to take off knowing who the receiver is going to be, unlike the KC-46 that can be flexible. But this is what's out at Selfridge. They've been around. They're going to be around for a long time. Just like the B-52, they were all built about the same time. Not only have the last people to fly these very airplanes yet, but the parents of the last people to fly the very same airplanes sitting out there have not been born yet. It's amazing if you think about it. 64 years old, they will be more than 100 years old and still fly. Strategic airlift. We built, was over 100 of these. We've decided to cut the fleet back, modified them, re-engined them through the years. But this plane built, designed in the late 60s, produced in the early 70s. Older, but this is the largest airplane, the outsized cargo capability that we have in the U.S. Air Force. When we need to send tanks in an airplane overseas, which is not an efficient way to do it, this is the only thing that can do it to go around the world. But big, expensive, old, tough to keep in service. We always joke whenever you go anywhere on a C-5, wherever you land, plan on staying a few days because it's going to break. And I got plenty of stories of that in the Gulf War and everything else. But it is the outsized cargo capability, and if I put a picture of it next to our next biggest plane, the C-17, you'll see that it really does dwarf it. About the same gross weight as the 747. Our workhorse right now, let's call it a mid-size, the C-17, a couple hundred of these in service, but even they're going to be 22 years old. But this is the workhorse of cargo hauling in the U.S. Air Force right now, where they're jumping parachutes out the back, putting out pallets, or simply moving cargo from point A to point B. The C-17 is the workhorse, and a very good mission-capable rate. We have a lot of different types of VIP transports. They're just modified planes of different types that we can put VIPs on. Almost all of these are at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. But they got the distinct paint job. Any of these actually can be Air Force One, depending on if the president is on board. The Gulfstream models have 16 of these. So once again, VIP transports for a lot of the government agencies and VIPs in the Air Force. I've gotten to fly on these a few times. I enjoy it. There's only about 20 seats on this thing. Conference tables in the middle, very nice and comfortable. A couple of them are operated by the DC Guard, which is how I was able to go on there. But very, very nice accommodations. This is like first class plus, the way these things are set up. And just like an airliner, very good mission capable rate, because they're not any different than an airliner. 737 in that case. C-130s, all right? So we started building C-130s, designed in the late 40s, built in the early 50s. They've been through a number of different models. The H model, now this is the one that we are getting rid of in service, started flying in 1965, 31 years old, not a very good mission capable rate. We are decommissioning the H model C-130s, replacing it with the J model C-130s. So we're building new ones to this date, have 151 in the inventory, newer, more capable, better engines, better props. They've decided that the best replacement for a C-130 is to build a new model of a C-130, and that's been the case since the 1950s. We have 10 of them that are interestingly modified, that fly out of upper New York State, Schenectady, that support the National Science Foundation down in the poles. You can actually see on the side of the plane there, it says National Science Foundation, because they helped fund this. The little rockets on the side are called JATO. That's a jet assisted takeoff, JATO. And you can see they strap a number of it because they got to figure out how to land these things on and then take off from glaciers and ice and stuff down in the poles. So they figured out, and they're very smart people that operate these, but a unique capability. It's vested in the National Guard with the National Science Foundation partnership. That's Air Force One. Looks a lot like the other one, but if he's on board, we would call it Air Force One. We only have 2 of them, and the other 2 is that we're modifying 2 other 747s to be Air Force Ones, okay, right now. So I think they're going to replace them, so we should have no more than 2 in service at any given time with the Presidential Airlift Group, the PAG, out of Andrews. For some reason, they don't tell us the mission capable rate. We have rescue helicopters that have been around for a while. They can see that they're pretty capable, but 30 years old. They've been in service for a while. So the Air Force does a competition. They decided that the Chinook is going to make a great replacement for this. All the bidders and everything griped about it. They recompeted the contract, and the replacement for the Black Hawk is a Black Hawk. All right, it's just the new model of the Black Hawk now. You can see just from the years and everything else with it, new motors, new capabilities and everything, but it's the same basic airframe now that is being built to replace the rescue helicopters in the Air Force. There's a handful of helicopters we use to support when we move our nuclear missiles around and everything in the fields up in the northern tier. I'll go ahead one. We've been using these forever. It's some of the very few UH-1 Hueys still in service anywhere in the U.S. In fact, I think it's the only ones. The Army hasn't even flown these in the longest time. They're being replaced by these. All right, and once again, there's just a prototype flying. We don't have any in operational service yet, but the Gray Wolf, am I saying it right? Gray Wolf is going to be the replacement for those Hueys. And their job is when we're moving nuclear missiles, we have helicopters that fly around. They support different sites. Because if you've ever looked at our missile fields, they are like massively spread out all over the place. So there's the tyranny of distance, but this is how we help support those fields. Talked about that guy. Our primary trainer now, for those of us who grew up on the T-37, a little tweak, this is the replacement for it, the primary trainer. A little prop, the T-6 Texan. Got a bunch of these to teach people, and you can ask each one of these planes how many people have thrown up in the back seat. Then when we go to advanced training now, this is for crew airplanes. They go to the J1. Or the T1, the Jayhawk. So we have a bunch of these. This is where you learn to fly more advanced, but also with a crew. People go into fighters and similar type of planes still go to the plane that's been around for the longest time, the T-38, sleek-looking airplane, almost 500 of them still in service, 60 years old. They did have some wings fall off some of them in past years. Maintenance problem when you get that old. I'm about 60, trust me, my wing falls off every now and then. Replacing the T-38 is going to be this. That's the plan. Okay, so we've got the T-7. It just flew last year, right? No, it was 2016. I don't think it was that long ago, but the T-7 is supposed to be in service to replace the T-38. All right, into the unmanned capabilities this month, right? Down in Battle Creek, we're going to have an operator and a pilot. So the one who flies this around and then the one who operates the sensors and the weapons are going to come and talk a lot more in depth because they operate these. They don't fly them out of, they operate these from Battle Creek over in the 110th Wing across the state. But they're also operated by countries, or us, all around the world, different services to include CIA, etc. But we say that we have 244 of these in service around the world. They've been around for a while. Predator, which is the precursor to this one, we always hear about Predator. This thing's about twice as big, carries more gas, can go farther, and carry more type of weapons. So this is the follow-on. This is the new generation to the Predator. It's called the Reaper. But nowadays, anybody on the ground, they want eyes in the sky. They want that capability. So the demand for this type all around the world, wherever we are engaged, is just through the roof. Now we only have a handful of these left. These were the high altitude. Think of it kind of like the U-2. It goes up into the 80, 90,000 feet, can fly all the way around the world, an unmanned version. They've gotten rid of a number of them, and I think it's only the Block 40s I believe that we have left, so fewer than 10 of them. The Navy operates a version of this around the oceans and everything, but the U.S. Air Force now only has fewer than 10 of these. They normally fly out of Beale in California, Northern California. Not listed on ages or anything else, but we had to acknowledge that this thing existed. It's a low observable drone. And the reason we had to acknowledge that it existed is because Iran pirated one of them, took over the data link, landed it on an airbase there, they stole it, and they put pictures in the newspaper. So guess what? We had to say, yeah, that's us. All right, so we have the RQ-170. Who knows how many are out there? And I don't know, I'm guessing there are replacements to it since it's relatively older. That Iran thing happened about 15 years ago. So this has been around for quite a while. All right, and as we get ready to kind of finish up with this, this has actually been in the news lately. This is the replacement for our Minuteman. We have about 400 to 450, depending on how you talk about operational. But these things sit in silos around the country. These are the nuclear missiles. They can have multiple warheads. They go up multiple warheads from one missile. They're very old. We've had them around the Minuteman for a long time. This is supposed to be the replacement. It was in the news because it had a cost increase of 81%. And yet they're still saying we're going to keep producing these. So this is sucking up a whole lot of money to replace this part of our nuclear triad. I'm sorry, this is the Minuteman III. This is the one that's going to be replaced by that. All right, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So the older ones that we have currently in the silos, we probably have 800, 900, or 1,000 of them, because every year we shoot a couple without warheads on them just to test them. And then we're going to build 642 of these to replace the Minuteman. But this is the one that's currently at $100 and some odd billion at 81% over the cost that they're saying they're going to continue with this program because it's so important. Our Air Forces all around the world. Sir?
You talked about AWACS, but what about the E7 wedge tail? Are we still getting it?
Yes, that's actually planned to be the replacement. So it's a version of the 737 that has an interesting little spine and everything on the back, which is called the E7 wedge tail. I don't think it's a program of record yet, but don't quote me on that, but it's actually not. My source for all this, by the way, I'll give the AFA a plug, is the almanac issue that AFA publishes every year. And they did not have anything in there about the wedge tail yet. There's a couple countries that bought it. It's an airborne radar version of the 737 that's supposed to replace that AWACS with the big dome on it. Country likes it. It's going to be a cost issue. I think Australia is the ones that we borrowed to look at and how they're working at this point. But the wedge tail is supposed to be a replacement for the AWACS. There's not a number associated with it yet. But these are the main operating bases all around the world. The Air Force is spread thin. We don't have that many airplanes when you really start counting up those numbers, that type of capability. But when we're talking about, facing off with China, they only have one theater. Yeah, we have Homeland Defense, we have Europe, we have South, we have places everywhere. So we have to realize that we're mathematically going to be at a disadvantage. We're going up against adversaries that don't have this type of capability. The money that we put into these big airplanes, the tankers and everything, because once again, that's a unique capability that we have. It's something that we've been blessed with being able to do. Are we going to be able to continue to do that going forward in the future? Because if we build tankers, it means we're buying fewer fighters. So what is the capability and how are we going to approach it going forward? Sir?
Odie, our government is essentially run by our senators and representatives who are elected by the people in each state.
Okay. There's one further, go continue.
And Michigan does not have a big aviation industry. We're known as the automotive capital.
Correct.
But we are really an innovation center. Is anyone studying the supply chain that we have here in Michigan, which I think is better than any other state in the country, and how it could be adapted to the needs of the aviation industry?
Wow, there's a lot packed into your question. Can everybody hear him okay? Yes. Talking about, one, the supply chain goes well beyond Michigan. We have capabilities here, but we are reliant on a supply chain that goes outside of our state. Raw material, everything is required to do what you're talking about. So there is a supply chain that goes well beyond Michigan. We have a lot of capabilities here, but we do have that stovepipe thinking of we're an automotive Whatever. Automotive nowadays, with technology, with capabilities, et cetera, means we could be aerospace, we just haven't mentally gone there. The capabilities were very, very similar. Through the years, usually they were very different industries. Now, with technology and everything, I think a great argument can be made with the merger. But just as your question was, again, rephrase just the question part of it.
Is anyone studying the needs of the aircraft aviation industry and how we can adapt our supply chain here in Michigan to fulfill those needs?
You want a short answer? No. About fulfilling those needs, and I say that because we still look, most people in Michigan are looking at short-term, how are we going to do it? If people want an F-35 suffers because, oh, we can get involved with the F-35. No, the F-35 was decided more than 2 decades ago. You're late. They're designing the tanker replacements for what's out there now with the major manufacturers. If the companies aren't involved now, and what's going to be built 20 years from now, we're going to miss the boat. So we are very late to need. We are very much looking at our shoes and not looking at the horizon as a state. I don't mean to badmouth the state, but there's a reason we don't manufacture, as far as I know, there's not an airplane or a helicopter manufactured in the state of Michigan. None. We build pieces, parts, and everything, and send them to other people. But it's because we have not integrated properly in the long strategic look that we need to in aerospace. The OOR. How long did it go from the time a plane flew to the time it was operation? Now go all the way back to when it first went to the drawing board. We're talking decades that it takes to design an airplane for the time it's operation. We need to be engaging over here, not here. Make sense?
About 6 or 7 years ago, the director of supply chain management, essentially the director of purchasing for Boeing, visited our building. It was a woman, and she reported to me that Boeing at the time was spending more than $1 billion a year here in Michigan on their supply chain. How do we increase that billion to $5 billion, for example?
Well, I think once again, it's that strategic look forward to being engaged with people like Boeing. That's exactly the people we need to be talking with, because it's your Boeing, it's your Lockheed, it's your Northrop Grumman that are designing those planes for the future. And we need to be on the ground floor with them, not reacting. We want to be as part of their innovation to begin with. And that's where I think we really could, there's an opportunity to improve. As far as I know, that's not happening, and I don't have any direct insights. Is he allowed to keep asking questions? Is it a question?
No.
Okay.
A suggestion. This organization is one of the most powerful and influential in the entire state of Michigan. And I think we should leverage our strengths to lobby, if you will, our state people to do a little bit more to support our economy, the economy that this organization represents.
All our elected officials in the room, are you listening? Okay.
Now I'll shut up.
Lisa, you were going to say
Looks
something?
like we have our new partner with MEDC with the defense. Is that joke here today?
They call it used to be the Michigan.
John Gutierrez.
Yes.
But they changed the name, Michigan.
Defense and Aerospace Innovation Center. It's based up in Lansing.
We're going to give that to you as a go-do to have him.
You got the wrong guy.
Nope, I think we got the perfect guy. All right, what other questions? Sir?
Good. A couple of years ago, they awarded, the horizontal launch, out of Oscoda for satellites.
Right.
And also up in Marquette, the
Correct.
vertical launch. What's the status on those? Are they,
Okay, you're talking about the horizontal vertical launch of Michigan Launch Initiative,
all right.
is what you're talking about, and that was a commercial thing to begin with, not military.
Right.
That was a straight
Right.
commercial space venture, and honestly, I have no idea. I have not heard anything on it in the longest time, other than protests that they don't want it. At least the vertical launch on the north. I have not heard any updates on Michigan Launch Initiative in well over a year.
I thought they were, put money into it already and everything, or building it, you know how you get that.
Yep. From what I said, we can talk offline, but I have not heard any update
Thank you.
on anything happening with that. What else? Anybody? Certainly.
trying to figure out how to articulate this for brevity, but situation, we're talking about potential near-peer conflicts in a contested or highly contested air environment. And it strikes me that any air battle with a near-peer competitor would likely occur over their airspace, or at least somewhat neutral airspace, not our own, right?
Correct.
So any kind of air conflict is going to be a forward projected one.
All right.
Not at home base, right? Is that either from carriers or forward bases?
Okay.
Is that accurate?
It is. Want me to answer that?
Well, so going forward then.
What he's saying is that for us to deploy, we have to go a long distance, and we're going to be fighting people who don't.
Yes.
I can answer something to that in a second.
Okay. And all these near peers are extremely focused on A2AD right now for that reason. Is that also correct?
Area denial?
Yes. Yep. Anti-access.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess my question then is part one: how relevant are some of these aircraft going to be in a forward deployed, A2AD environment? And then part two, do we have our own type of A2AD capabilities that we're developing in terms of SAMs or surface to surface, ship to surface, that kind of thing, given that a fight with China, God forbid, would happen in the South China Sea, not near an Air Force base in Nevada?
Okay. I don't know how to recoup everything you just said,
Sorry.
but I think I have my answer. So one of the questions was about, let's call it the tyranny of distance.
Yes.
So a perfect example, our closest base to Taiwan right now is Kadena, which is 200 and some odd miles from Taipei. So it takes a while for our plane to take off, fly that far, go to a mission, come back. China, on the other hand, is less than 100 miles across the strait. So they can launch theoretically twice as many missions from the same airplane. So if we each had 20 airplanes, they could have 40 times there for every 20 that we can. So the distance gives you more capabilities. Why the Israelis and what they did with the flow-through shelters, one airplane could fly 7 or 8 sorties a day. That's how they overwhelmed their adversaries and all this. They didn't have more airplanes, they just had them there a whole lot more. So they were overwhelming with power because of their presence. So geography plays a huge part of that. Area denial, the further you drive that back, especially like aircraft carriers, if they have to sit 700, 800 miles, 1,000 miles away, it takes a lot longer for the planes to come back and forth and all that. So it gives them a sanctuary to operate. The last part of your question is, what do we have for aerial denial type of capabilities? You brought up surface air missiles. By the way, we only have 17 Patriot batteries in our whole United States Army, if we haven't given some of those away at this point to Ukraine. So think about all the different places in the world we are, and the only air defense capability we really have other than the short-range stuff, that is very, very limited compared to Russia that has them by the hundreds of batteries. Okay, we have just never put the development into ground base. Our sea base is actually remarkably capable. Aegis system on board the Burke destroyers and Ticonderoga class cruisers with the SM-6, that type of stuff. Most of our anti-missile capability all around the world is sea-based because of that vision. What you're hearing now, in fact, it was just again in the news the last couple of days, we're going to be basing medium, intermediate range missiles in Europe. This new Typhoon TYPHO in Taiwan. It's basically a Navy vertical launch system on a truck that they can put forward, and then they can shoot anything that the Navy does, to include the SM-6, which is the out-of-atmosphere type of a capability. So we're learning. I think what's happening in Ukraine is driving a lot of that. We don't have the time to develop a new system, so we're taking, in the case of the Army, who does air defense, they're taking what the Navy's learned and are trying to apply that technology to a land-based answer. I know we have a Aegis ashore in Poland, which is basically like a Navy ship, but it's on the ground in Poland with launch capabilities there that just went operational. There was supposed to be others, but that's the one that popped in my brain. And that one theoretically could intercept Russian missiles going after Ukraine, just so you know the types of capabilities. But yes, area denial is huge. I can't think of a scenario now where we really need to employ that to drive an adversary backwards because they're in our homeland to begin with. All right, so we're going to be over hostile territory. So it's a unique threat to us that we don't necessarily have to project back to them because of the geography. How's that for a long answer to a short question? No, a long answer to a long question.
Yeah, I don't think I was brief, so that works.
Okay. Anything else? Dead quiet. Well, I do want to thank everybody. I knew I threw a lot of information at you. If you have any other questions or whatever, please come up and ask. But our Air Force, men and women, are doing remarkable work. The challenges, oh, by the way, we didn't even talk about weapons. That was a whole other category of what types of things come off our airplanes when we have people on the ground or in the air. We didn't even touch on that because that's the whole purpose of the airplane, right? Is to get something from point A to point B. But that's another discussion that we can have. But this is what we do. The Air Force Association, we talk about in-gap, we talk about these types of capabilities. We advocate to Congress of here is what our Air Force needs. We're the voice of the Air Force and the Space Force because the people in uniform can't. And you've heard me say this before, they are part of the executive branch of government, so it is an inherent problem for them to go lobby the legislative branch while they're wearing uniform. Then there's the Title 10 side of it too. So the very people who started the Air Force, started this Air Force Association to be their voice, or as we call it, the force behind the force. And oh, by the way, my parting reminder to you is, you're the best in the country. The best AFA in the country is right here in Michigan. So on that note, if you have any sidebar discussions, come ask and everything. Grab a taco on your way out. God bless you, and we'll see you at the picnic information coming forward.